right, folks, we are back. It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Bermas, and we have Chris Pinto from America's Secret Beginnings, and we were discussing the pentagram in the DC architecture. Let's discuss a little bit what the pentagram means in this occult symbology in relation to the star Sirius.
To the dog star, excuse me, to the dog star Sirius, the pentagram, well, we talk about a couple of different levels. One, we talk about, because what we're trying to prove is whether or not Pierre L'Enfant and the guys who were designing this street layout at that time, if they had knowledge of this, if they knew about it somehow or other. Although the pentagram does represent, in Masonic lodges, it does represent the blazing star, they call it. And Albert Pike, in his book Morals and Dogma, writes about how the blazing star is at the center of every Masonic lodge. Now, I've never seen one in a lodge myself in the way that they describe, but from what I'm told from former Masons, every Masonic lodge has in a hidden location a pentagram that they call their blazing star, and it dates back to ancient Gnosticism. And to the Gnostics, the pentagram was a symbol for the dog star Sirius, which is very significant because for the Masons and the occultists, the light behind the all-seeing eye on the back of the dollar bill, the light that shines behind the eye is not the light of the sun, as some people think. It's the light of Sirius that is illuminating the eye. And one of the depictions of that, if you were to go into a Masonic lodge, and you could find them online, the imagery, but you'll see some kind of drawing, and they'll have the eye in the center, right, and there'll be light shining around it, and then there'll be the sun on one side and the moon on the other side. Okay, so you know that the light behind the eye is not the light of the sun. And what they're symbolizing there is the sun and the moon represent the male and the female principle. And these are the basics of alchemy. And they repeat this over and over again in the imagery in Washington, D.C. If you go and stand before a lot of the government buildings, you'll see on one side there'll be a male figure, and on the other side there'll be a female figure. That represents the sun and the moon to them. And then in between them, in a triangle formation, usually like in the upper part of the building in a tympanum, there'll be some kind of a figure there that represents a perfect ideal. And it's justice, or it's, labor, or it's, truth, purity, something like that, that represents a perfected ideal. And that's the formula that they use in the occult. But as it pertains, for example, to the eye, this takes us now, we were talking earlier about Pythagoras and how the pentagram is a Pythagorean symbol. According to Pythagoras, also has his Pythagorean theorem, where you've got a square plus b square equals c square, right? We all learned that in high school and so on. But for the Mason and those who are involved in the occult, it represents the male principle plus the female principle equals the offspring of them both, which is the perfected being. And this is a symbol for their Masonic Christ, their New Age Christ figure. And that's ultimately what's symbolized by Sirius, by the pentagram and the all-seeing eye floating above the pyramid. It's a symbol for their Antichrist that they all envision and hope will come into the world at any given moment. And they all write about this, of course, and we talk about that through the series as well. But we see, especially in Part 3 in Eye of the Phoenix, when you see the interest that the Freemasons have in rebuilding the temple there in Jerusalem. They want to rebuild Solomon's temple. And we believe the reason they want to rebuild it is because they are looking forward to the emergence or appearance or manifestation of their Masonic Christ figure that's going to come into the world and supposedly lead mankind into a golden era. And
this is supposed to be Maitreya, or the next Buddha, correct? And It's just crazy to me that, they not only believe this, but they write about it all over the place. And then one of the, lesser known things is that in the Bohemian Grove, the owl god isn't the only thing out there. It's not just Moloch. St. John of Maple Nook is in there too, but they also have a Maitreya or Buddha in the Grove. You can see some of the old pictures from 1913, 1930s in a different section of the Grove.
Wow, now that I did not know, Jason. That's very interesting, but it totally fits in with everything else they're doing. And I know I won't jump ahead, but when we talk about Eye of the Phoenix, I'm sure we'll bring it up again. But they take that symbolism, for those who haven't studied it, they really take that symbolism very, very seriously. And not just in America, but all the way around the world. And this is one of the things that comes out in Eye of the Phoenix, where apparently in honor of a Maitreya image, an image of this fifth Buddha, you have dignitaries that show up all over the world for a special event. But we can go into that more later. But yeah, it's
I'm gonna have to email you those photos, because when I saw it, I was like, wow, it looks like, and there's been some emails back and forth with this individual that believes that the Bohemian Grove is actual an occultic nematome, and that is, it has different sections for different religious beliefs, but definitely has that Maitreya statue there, and it's quite alarming. One of the guys that you talked about earlier, that the Masons are very into, is a guy named Manly P. Hall, and you guys go to the Manly P. Hall Society throughout the series. And the curator is one of the guys that gets interviewed pretty heavily there. And he seems like, a very, educated man. He's obviously into this. He seems very reasonable, but then you start talking to him and you talk about, what his concept of quote-unquote Lucifer is. And he believes it's just knowledge. It's just the pursuit of knowledge. Can you talk to that? I mean, there are some in the occult that seem to believe that this is, again, Lucifer, the light, all this stuff is just, the pursuit of knowledge. Other people believe it's a metaphysical or physical being.
Yeah, it's, even in their circles, I don't know that everybody would clearly agree, and you learn that the more you read their stuff and talk to them. Some would see Lucifer as a very real being or very, very real person, and others, like you said, would just see him as kind of a force, or that knowledge was really Lucifer. And what they do is they go back to, and they all do this. I could show you in Albert Pike's writings, in Eliphas Levi, Madame Blavatsky, they all do the same thing. They go back to the Garden of Eden, and they embrace this ancient Gnostic doctrine. The word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. And in the Garden of Eden, they take the account of Adam and Eve, where Adam and Eve were tempted, or Eve was tempted by the serpent, and they reverse the roles of God and the devil. And they say that God, who had created Adam and Eve as these automatons, right? They were just going to obey him by faith and his command. But that he was a devil because he had forbidden them to partake of the tree of knowledge. So then the serpent comes along, and they believe the serpent is an angel of light who came to, initiate them into the secret knowledge so that their eyes could be opened and they could become as gods. And so they believe the serpent now is a representation of the true God, Lucifer, the god of light, so they claim. If you get Masonic publications like their magazines and stuff, they have a lamp burning and it says knowledge is light. This is what they're referring to. The Masonic calendar in later publications in Masonry, beginning around the 1600s, they began to trace the origin of Masonry all the way back to Adam. Okay, that was the beginning of Masonry. And the reason is because that is when Adam and Eve were initiated by their doctrine through knowledge, through the tree of knowledge, by Lucifer. And they all write about this in a whole variety of ways. But they insist in their writings that Lucifer and Satan are not the same person. And they really believe Lucifer is the true God, and that Satan, the enemy, is really the God who created Adam and Eve.
Yeah, and that's gone over in that does segue us into Eye of the Phoenix, because that's a a large portion of it. They talk about that and Gnosis and Blavatsky. But one of the other big players that I really didn't know anything about before watching this film was Nicolas Roche. And why don't we just go over who he was, because he was a rather popular figure at the time, and why he is important.
Well, Nicholas Roerich, that's apparently the way the name is pronounced.
Yeah.
And I learned that by going to the Roerich Museum there in New York. But Roerich was, as you said, Jason, is a highly celebrated international figure. And if you go and study this guy and read up on him, you wonder how it is that he disappeared from modern history books, because he was very, very significant, especially during the FDR era. But he was a Russian mystic. He was a philosopher. He was a painter, a writer, and he really became famous as this exotic Russian painter. And he would do set designs for Broadway shows and things like that. And then he had all of these very elaborate, colorful paintings